So what's next? Are you going to run again? Are you going? Do we get to look forward to this and galvanize again?
I will likely run again.
Yeah!
I don't know
Yes! Oh my God. So are you going to go up against some tough men who kind of don't always play fair?
Well, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And if it doesn't.
All right. That was Drew Barrymore interviewing former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams yesterday. Robby, what do you make of this? Third time's the charm?
Did Drew Barrymore just do an election denial? She said sometimes they don't play fair. Was she saying it was not fair?
Okay, this is saying that you think that there were things that were said or done in an election that are unfair is not the same thing as challenging the results of the election. People say a Willie Horton ad was unfair, misleading campaign promises are unfair, taking dark money is unfair. There are a lot of things that are manifestly, substantively rigged about elections that don't have to do with actually thinking the vote totals were lied about. However, look,
Drew Barrymore very plugged into the, got her finger on the pulse of where the country is.
I think Drew seems like a delightful human being, a sweet summer spirit.
I really like 50 First Dates.
50 First Dates is a classic. E.T. However, I'm not sure I would necessarily take her
it was too scary
political announcement. Okay, Robby.
Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
The point is, I think that the enthusiasm that she is demonstrating in this interview is reflective of how a lot of Democrats feel about Stacey Abrams. I think the thinking is that her losses so far don't preclude her viability as a political candidate, that she has in fact been engaged in some pretty tough races. She would have been the first woman, the first black person to be governor of Georgia. It was a very hotly contested race against an incumbent this time around. Certainly there is a history of people kind of lowering the horizons and running for less competitive races and less competitive positions after they fail. Is it unreasonable for Stacey Abrams to think that she should go ahead and make that sort of a pivot? Or you think she should just be tanking her entire political career and going back to the law firm or whatever?
Yeah, I think she should find something else to do with her time than run for office. It's just not working. Also, I can't, this will not avoid me commenting on it. The masks in the audience, did you see those?
I did. I saw those? Many people on the internet commenting.
Fun yellow Drew Barrymore mask. Stacey Abrams is a candidate that loves photo ops in front of masked people where she is not masked. That's happened over and over again.
We're going to really have to do this conversation.
We got to do it.
I know that there's this narrative that people like, including a lot of people that I myself am very fond of, that says that there's this kind of elitism of the people who are speaking at an event being unmasked and the people in the event being masked. I think that the reality is that when you're the person who everyone is there to see, people want to see you and want you to be unmasked, and absent putting you in some kind of like Pyrex cube, which they could probably have experimented with, but absent doing that, other people being masked does minimize the risk. Now, obviously, the people on the stage who are to be seen are likely to be in a more elite class than people who are there to pay tickets and be the viewing public. And so there's a weird dynamic that emerges. And I think when you're talking about something like a gala or like an eating event, like a seated event where there are a lot of guests and there are a lot of service members and the service members have to be masked and the guests don't have to be masked, there's no excuse for that, right? Mm-hmm. But when the person who is giving a public address is unmasked and other people by choice, or I think they were probably forced to do it in this context and they are wearing the exact same mask.
Yeah, I don't think they were. I don't think that was choice. Which if they want to wear a mask, fine.
It's a slightly different situation.
Yeah, some of the photos of her were with very young school kids, which I don't, love the idea of them being forced to wear masks all day as they climb all over. It also seems kind of pointless as they climb all over each other all day and play places and such.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think we're getting a lot of studies. I think they're really pursuing this a lot in France right now, where the emphasis should be on improving the ventilation in these kinds of spaces. So at a tightly packed studio, Drew Barrymore has to be in there every day. I hope for everybody's
it's probably a very well ventilated place.
No, what I'm saying is I hope for everybody involved sake, including the audience members and the crew, that those kind of spaces are well ventilated. But that aside, what do you make of the actual politics of this thing? I mean, because this certainly is the case that many people look. Joe Biden, he was a senator. That was a substantial win, but it took him 3 times running for president to actually succeed succeed. There are many stories of people failing, and ultimately being successful down the line. And I got to say, as much as we have been critical of Stacey Abrams on the show, the emphasis on the voter fraud types of claims in the state that haven't come to fruition, the poor spending, the misappropriation of funds around all of those lawsuits, I do think she has a lot of political talent. And we saw it more in 2018 before the Democratic Party got her
This
claws
sounds
so
like
deep into her.
girl boss feminism to me, or the way Drew Barrymore framed it.
Sure,
like the men are out to get you. Maybe they're not playing fair or something. She lost the same guy person in a cycle that was disastrous for Republicans, where Republicans underperformed all over the place. She didn't win.
So you don't think there's something to the idea that it was a hard race to begin with? It was a long shot for her for a lot of reasons, politically, demographically. It's a state that's turning blue, but it is, historically a red state. No one thought she would come as close as she did in 2018. That you should judge her losses a little differently.
She didn't come as close as she did in
Right, but now she's up against an incumbent who didn't exactly do all of the crazy fear-mongering things that people said that the Trump.
I think the strength of her opponent had a lot to do with it, but she did not make herself a more compelling candidate since 2018.
I think that's true too, but the fundamental question I'm trying to get at here, Robby, is just because someone loses a hard race, does that mean they shouldn't run again?
I think if you lose, and then you lose again and you do worse, you should take a look in the mirror.
Right, but taking a look in the mirror could mean I'm not going to run for governor of Georgia again. It could be that I'm going to run for a House seat. I'm going to run for Senate. I'm going to run for a mayoral position. I'm going to,
Well, I'm sure she can find a district somewhere that would elect her. I mean, most districts are safe for whichever party has a clear majority.
I'm going to run
right?
for president. Yeah. Could be the thing that she's thinking of. Certainly, you don't have to be a congressman before you do that. Donald Trump was really lauded for being an outsider in his
Beto
first
O'Rourke,
run.
who we have often compared her to, decided in the wake of his loss to just make a go for president.
Right, and I believe he's been much less successful in his electoral endeavors than Stacey Abrams has been.
Well, like Stacey Abrams, he put up pretty good numbers against Ted Cruz back in 2018. And he, even though he didn't win, he did help, I think, a lot of local Democrats in statewide races had better results because he was bringing people to the polls. So you could argue that was worth it. Made Ted Cruz sweat a little bit. But then he decided from that in the same way that Stacey Abrams did. And again, they were invited to make these conclusions by a mainstream or elite progressive media that flattered them with all those magazine covers and the new Democrat.
Like Drew. Sorry, Drew, but that is not the right approach to be taking.
That's exactly what she's doing. I mean, there's no way she is that. So there's no way she doesn't do that. I mean, she's just. Like she is Drew Barrymore. This is the adoration from the kind of media Democratic elite, the cultural elites.
She's just reflecting
when you're getting that, it just
what
doesn't
everyone
help
has
you.
heard, right? Like, well, I'm not expecting Drew Barrymore to have this fully fleshed out political perspective. She's parroting back. She's reflecting
Drew Barrymore,
back.
not a dirtbag leftist. What a surprise.
Yeah, but look, she's parroting back all of the glowing media that we've seen that has basically pre-coordinated Stacey Abrams before she actually won anything. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I don't think that Stacey Abrams has ever been left enough for me, but I have thought that people underestimated her political talent in 2018. I think that if she's able to tap back into some of that populism that she demonstrated at the time, she could be successful in the future. I don't think that losing necessarily means you have to sit it out, but running again and again and again, not learning from your mistakes, and in fact, doubling down on the things that caused you to be less successful in each iteration is a big problem. And so I do agree with you, Robby. I hope she sits down, takes a beat, and does some deep thinking before she
left enough for Briahna Joy Gray is a difficult milestone to clear, I think, for a lot of people.
Look, I would contend that, but I don't know that we have time to get through that.
Oh, but we do want to make sure you know that Stacey Abrams' group was actually ordered to pay over $200,000 after losing a voting rights trial. And we've talked a lot on the show. We interviewed a great reporter about how it doesn't quite add up, the amount of money she took in and what it was used for, and that there's some allegations of it was paying a former staffer, a former chief of staff who was put in charge of this voting rights organization, that they were paid very handsomely.
Yeah.
So check that out, and we'll have more Rising right after this.